Barb, here we are again up here at the Frankfort Cemetery, and so glad to see you again.
Well, it's good to be here again. It's so pretty. It's getting warmer though.
Yeah, it's getting warmer this afternoon deal now. But here we are at the grave of another very distinguished gentleman, Augustus Owsley Stanley. I want you to take particular attention to the middle name Owsley because his mother's name was Amanda Owsley Stanley. She was the niece of the 16th governor of Kentucky. Remember downtown we talked about Governor Owsley there that lived there on Main Street? Yeah. So he was, this gentleman was a very distinguished man. As a matter of fact, I have known personally every governor all the way back to Stanley, not including Governor Black. Governor Black did succeed Stanley when Stanley went on to the Senate, and Black only served about 6 months when they had an election and he was defeated by Morrow. But that's really sort of another story, and I'll tell you about it, okay?
Okay.
Governor Stanley received his A.B. degree from Center College, Barb, in 1899. Following 6 terms in the U.S. Congress, Stanley was elected governor, but did not fill out the full term because he resigned to fill a vacant seat in the U.S. Senate created by the death of Senator Ollie James. Actually, in the year of his marriage, he won a heated 3-way race for the nomination of Congress. And he served in Congress from 1903 to 1915. In the gubernatorial race, he was elected over Edwin P. Morrow, the Republican candidate, get this, Barb, by a majority of 470 votes.
My goodness.
Stanley and Morrow were very close friends, and they actually traveled together. And he served in the Senate until 1925, and he died in Washington, D.C. in 1958. Fine gentleman. My daddy took me up to Washington one time, and at that time is when I was introduced to Governor Stanley. Barb, this is the grave of the Reverend John Gano, who was born in 1736 and died in 1804. His wife, Sarah, is buried right beside him. The important thing that I want to bring out to you, Barbara, is the fact that he was the chaplain during the Revolutionary War. This is the grave here of Edwin P. Morrow. He was born November the 28th, 1877, and he was the 40th governor of Kentucky. And you remember I told you about the campaign between A.O. Stanley and Edwin P. Morrow? It was quite a mud-slinging campaign. They're both good friends. Mm-hmm. Stanley won the first run for governor over Morrow by 477 votes. You remember I told you about that?
And they traveled together.
And they traveled together on the train. They were good friends. But let me sit down over here and I'll tell you a little bit more, okay?
Great. I'm interested to know about Edwin Morrow.
But he defeated, a little bit later, Stanley's successor, James D. Black, by making light of his own previous campaign activities. And also, the Democratic legislature, you know, Morrow was a Republican, the Democratic legislature had passed the dog license law, placing a tax on man's best friend. And Morrow made an issue of getting relief for this very, very injustice act. He campaigned for his uncle, William O. Bradley, who was the successful candidate for the governor back in 1895. In 1910, President Howard Taft appointed Morrow to be the United States District Attorney for the Eastern District of Kentucky. In 1915, I believe it was, he was barely defeated by Stanley, as I have said. He died in Frankfort and is buried in the Frankfort Cemetery. Barb, let me tell you about a very distinguished man, Dr. Luke P. Blackman. He was born in Fayette County in 18 1816, and although his parents made their home in Woodford County, he was educated in the common schools of Woodford County. Then he received an M.D. degree from Transylvania in 1834. When cholera broke out in Versailles, Dr. Blackburn offered his services free to a people almost completely deprived of medical attention because a lot of the doctors had left.
Mm-hmm.
The grateful people of Versailles prevailed upon him to settle in their community. At one time, Barb, he attempted to supplement his income by a venture into the manufacture of rope and bagging. But in 1839, he failed with considerable financial losses. He did represent Woodford County in the State House of Representatives in 1843. Then, when drastic conditions in the South drew him to Natchez, Mississippi, where in 1846 he assumed general control of the yellow fever epidemic which broke out in the lower Mississippi Valley. With his knowledge and skill, he helped control the terrible epidemic, and he soon was recognized by the whole nation. He became interested in the welfare of the rivermen so much that at his own expense, Barb, he set up a Marine hospital in Natchez. And when the Civil War broke out, he offered his services to the Confederacy and was attached to the staff of General Sterling Price. He had long held an ambition to be governor of his native state, so he returned back to Kentucky in 1873, and in 1879 he was elected governor over Walter Evans, quite a famous gentleman. He had a brother, Barb, by the name of Joseph C.S. Blackburn, also lived in Woodford County. He went to school at the renowned B.B. Sower. He graduated with honors from Center College, and in 1861 he was an aide-de-camp to Confederate General William Preston. In 1871 he represented Woodford County in the legislature. In 1874 he was elected to Congress, and get this, Barb, in 1898 he was elected United States Senator from Kentucky. And in 1900 he was appointed governor of Panama, a brother of Dr. Luke Blackman. Okay? Barbara, just across the road from the state monument is a grave of Salmon, Bolivar, Buckner. He was born in Hart County, the son of Ailette Hartswell and Elizabeth Moorhead Buckner. You know, he wanted the Kentucky to remain neutral, and he was in charge of the militia here in Kentucky for a while. But after being forced by the continual Union invasion to abandon his diligent struggle for neutrality, Simon Bolivar Buckner became one of the most prominent and respected generals in the Confederacy. At the age of 17, he was appointed to West Point. He requested service in the Mexican War in 1846, and he was engaged in almost every battle of the war, and at that time he was promoted to the rank of captain. He returned to West Point in August of 1848 as assistant professor in infantry tactics, a position he held, Barbara, until 1850. He joined the Confederacy and was attached to General Albert Sidney Johnson's command, where he was made a brigadier general. By the terms, Barbara, of the South's surrender to the Union, General Buckner was denied the right to return to Kentucky until 1868. Isn't that unusual?
Oh, that is.
After that, however, he came back to Louisville and was the editor of the Louisville Courier-Journal. But by 1868, Barb, the Confederate element in Kentucky had become so dominant that Buckner returned to Kentucky with great applause. He received the Democratic nomination in 1887 and was elected over William O. Bradley, the Republican, in 1887 as governor of Kentucky. And also, I think this is important for you to know, in 1896, He was nominated for vice president on the gold Democratic ticket with John Palmore of Illinois for president. He died at the ripe old age of 90, Barb. Barb, he had a son that was very distinguished. Simon Bolivar Buckner, Jr. was born in July of 1886. He was born in Hart County, Kentucky. He graduated from the United States Military Academy in 1908. He attended VMI for a couple of years, and in 1904 was approved by President Theodore Roosevelt for West Point. This is important, I think. On June the 13th, he was appointed Commandant of Cadets at West Point by the War Department. Quite an honor, Barb.
Yes.
In July of 1940, he was made commander of the Alaska Defense Force, and he played a prominent role later in the recapture of the Aleutians from the Japanese in 1942-43. He was raised to the rank of Lieutenant General in 1943 after the Aleutian campaign and was named commander of the 10th Army. On April 1st, 1945, the 10th Army invaded Okinawa late in the war. The nomination as Lieutenant General incidentally gave him the same rank held in the Confederate Army by his father during the war between the states. When his father was 64 years old, he came to Kentucky as governor, and Simon Bolivar, Jr. was only about a year old. You see, Simon Bolivar Buckner Sr. was 34 years older than his wife, Delia Claiborne Buckner. Delia, the mother, was only 29 years old when Simon Bolivar Buckner Jr. was born. Isn't that interesting? It's a shame that he was killed just in the last few days of the World War II on Okinawa. It's a sad thing, Barbara. One other distinguished man, of course, that's buried nearby is William O. Connell Bradley. He was born in 1847 near Lancaster, Kentucky, and actually the family moved to Somerset while William was still very young. During his teens, he ran away twice to join the Union Army, but was released to his father because of his age. He was admitted to the bar, however, in 1865 and entered practice with his father. You know, he was nominated by his party 4 times for the United States Senate and an equal number of times for the U.S. House of Representatives. He made hard but unsuccessful races, and he refused finally to accept the nomination for Congress. In 1888, he received 105 votes in the National Convention for as a vice presidential nominee. In 1896, the Kentucky Republicans endorsed him for the presidential nomination. Bradley had been elected to become governor by defeating P. Watt Hardin the very previous year. In 1904, Bradley seconded the nomination of Theodore Roosevelt for President of the United States. Quite a famous person, and he died in office in Washington, D.C. in 1914 and was returned to Kentucky for burial in the cemetery here in Frankfort, just across from the State Monument. Before reaching the age of 21, he was elected to represent Scott County in the legislature. In 1807, he was elected to Congress and served there until 1819. In the War of 1812, he raised a battalion of 3 companies of mounted men and he fought with great gallantry at the Battle of the Thames, where it is said he slew the great Indian chief Tecumseh by his own hands. And he was carried from the battlefield, Barbara, with no less than 25 balls having passed through his horse, his clothes, or through him.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. In 1814, he again took his place in Congress. He served as U.S. Senator from 1819 to 1829. This is real significant, I think, that he was elected Vice President under Martin Van Buren in 1836. He was the only man to ever be elected by the United States Senate, Barbara, because at that time he received 137 electoral votes, and his three opponents received 137 electoral votes. So at that time, the law was if there was a tie for vice president, it was thrown into the Senate. So when it was thrown into the Senate, he beat the fellow from New York, as a matter of fact, and became vice president of the United States. Barb, this is the grave of Theodore O'Hara.
This is a beautiful.
Isn't that a beautiful thing? You know, he was the author of The Bivouac of the Dead. And that famous poem that he made it up for the soldiers that were being brought back from the Mexican War, mainly at the Battle of Buena Vista. But he studied law. He was a very good student, as a matter of fact. And the thing about it was this: he leaned toward the Confederacy. So when the Civil War broke out, he joined the Confederacy, and he was on the staff of General Albert Sidney Johnston. And at the Battle of Shiloh, it is said that the great General Albert Sidney Johnston died in his arms there at the terrible Battle of Shiloh early in the Civil War. He came back to Frankfort, lived here for many years, and he actually died June the 5th, 1867, not too long after the Civil War. I thought we should come by here and just see this particular monument, because it is this gentleman who was so important that made this great poem. I remember I had to memorize it when I was in school. The muffled drums had rolled his beat, the soldier's last tattoo, and so on. So the bivouac of Barb, this is the monument, the state monument that was erected to honor those that have fallen in the defense of their country. The monument was dedicated in 1850, and actually a gentleman by the name of Robert Launitz was the architect and sculptor of this very fine monument. I think this is important that you should know. As I've said, it was dedicated in 1850. It's 62 feet high of solid granite, and it also came from the Carrara marble quarry in Italy. When Launitz finished his masterpiece here, it was clear that he had spent more than $15,000 in the contract that he had with the state. Actually, it was $2,500 more. And the legislature offered to make up the difference, but he refused the extra sum. It is said that he was ever tempted to give more than he received. Well, Barbara, we're nearing the end of our tour.
Well, this is a beautiful, it looks like a recent grave.
It is. This is the grave of Lieutenant Governor Harry Lee Waterfield. He was born in January of 1911 down near Murray, Kentucky. He graduated from Murray University in 1932. In 1937, he was elected to the legislature and served about 12 years, and he was Speaker of the House in 1944 and again in 1946. And then in 1955, he was elected Lieutenant Governor along with Happy Chandler as Governor. And then again in 1963, he was elected Lieutenant Governor with Breathitt, when Breathitt won as Governor of Kentucky. I think it's interesting to note here that Harry Lee presided over the House and the Senate 2 years longer than any other person from the start of 1792 when Kentucky became a state. So, Barbara, here we are, finally, at the grave of Daniel and Rebecca Boone.
It's a beautiful sight.
Isn't it a beautiful sight? I just think it's gorgeous. But listen, I think, first of all, I'll sit down a little bit on this wall here and just tell you a little bit about the chapel, which is important, and also the Confederate lot. And then after I get a little rest, we'll come back and talk about Daniel Boone, okay?
Okay, that's great.
Barb, as I've said, I must tell you about the chapel. The chapel was built in 1890, and the building is a stone chapel of historical and architectural interest. It is of the Romanesque style, especially in the shape of the roof and the arched opening. This building served as a chapel until 1930s, when the current practice of holding memorial services in funeral homes was initiated. For several years there, from about 1930 until about 1978, it was used just as a storage place. But finally, a group of ladies here in Frankfort decided that they would restore the chapel, and they went to Governor Julian Carroll, and he gave them some money, and it is restored now, and it is used about 10 times a year. And thank goodness we had it during the memorial service in May, because it was raining hard. So the American Legion, VFWs, and so forth all held their service inside this fine chapel.
Well, tell me about this very special lot here, the Confederate lot.
The Daughters of the Confederacy in 1892 erected a monument to the Confederate dead, and it is of the finest Italian marble imported from, again, the Carrara quarries in Italy, the base of granite, and there is a life-size statue of the Confederate soldier dressed in Confederate uniform at parade rest, which crowns the column. It stands at the center of the Confederate lot, and it is encircled, Barbara, by the graves of 68 Confederate dead. The figure at the top is a statue of James G. Crockett, who was a Franklin County soldier who lost a leg in the Battle of Shiloh. After the Civil War, he was elected county court clerk, which position he held until his death in 1883.
Let's move over to this beautiful overlook of Frankfort and finish our series by talking about Daniel Boone.
Barbara, Daniel Boone was a great frontiersman. You know, he was born up near Reading, Pennsylvania in 1734. When he was about 18 years old, his family moved first down into Virginia just for a few months, and then they moved on down to the Yadkin Valley in North Carolina. When Daniel was about 18 or 19 years old, why, his sister Mary married a fellow by the name of William Bryan. At that wedding, Daniel Boone saw a beautiful girl by the name of Rebecca. Her name was Rebecca Bryan.
Oh.
So, of course, he went off to fight the Indians for a year or two, but then he came back to the Yadkin Valley, and he went to a cherry picking festival. And there again he saw this beautiful girl, Rebecca Bryan. So he married Rebecca Bryan when he was not quite 22 years old, and she was only 16 years old. So he, a little bit later, why, he started through the Cumberland Gap and started exploring Kentucky. And, of course, he fought the Indians, but also, Barbara, he got along pretty well with the Indians. And for his work during some of the wars, early wars, why, he received a land grant of a large tract of land in Kentucky. But Barbara, he wasn't a very good bookkeeper. He didn't get his deeds properly recorded. And it wasn't too long until he lost practically all of his property. He got heavily in debt, and he really got a little bit upset with Kentucky. So he finally moved to Missouri, and he settled down in a little place called Marthasville. Missouri. You know, Daniel had a large family, or rather he was a member first of a large family. There were 11 children by his mother and father. Squire Boone was his father's name. And so he was right in the middle. There were 11 children, and there were 5 younger and 5 older than Daniel. And as far as Daniel is concerned, Daniel and Rebecca had about 10 children.
Gosh.
So, nevertheless, as I have said, he got a little upset with Kentucky. He moved to Missouri, and he lived there for quite some time. He still loved to travel. When he was about 80 years old, he made a trip out to Yellowstone Park.
Gosh.
And most of it was done on horseback and walking and so forth and so on. An interesting little tidbit is that when he was about 83 years old, he realized that he was getting old, so he made himself a coffin out of black walnut, and he put it underneath his bed.
Oh.
And every now and then, he would bring it out and get in it to see if it still fit, because, you know, as we get a little older, we get a little broader sometimes. But an interesting thing is that one of his good friends passed away and didn't have a coffin. So Daniel gave him this black walnut coffin. But immediately he made another one. This time he made it of cherry. He and his family loved to eat. He loved to eat sweet potatoes. And his wife, bless her heart, she loved to make molasses. As a matter of fact, I believe it was about 1813. Why, she was making molasses and, of course, sampling a good bit of it, and she finally passed away.
Oh.
And that hurt Daniel considerably, of course. But he managed to make a couple of trips back to Kentucky. He wanted to pay off all of his debts. He went all the way back to Maysville, Kentucky, where he had I believe he had an interest in a bar back there. And then from there he went up to Cincinnati, where he visited. Much later than that, I think maybe I might have it on Thursday.
Okay.
That's right. And then he went back, of course, to Marthasville, Missouri. And at Marthasville, Missouri, he lived with his youngest son, Nathan, for quite some time. And then, as I've said before, he loved to eat sweet potatoes. And finally he got sick. And he passed away in 1820. And some people said it was because the children all and the grandchildren all loved him so much that they probably gave him too much sweet potatoes. But nevertheless, he was 86 years old when he passed away. So, Barbara, the Kentucky legislature passed an act, and they made negotiations with the people in Missouri to bring him back to Kentucky and bury him here. He wanted to be buried on a hill overlooking a river. So the people in Missouri agreed. Funny thing, however, when he got there, he was actually buried on a piece of property that was owned by a fellow by the name of Harvey Griswold. Harvey Griswold objected to it because he was a tourist attraction and he didn't want to let him go. So they had a special meeting of all the relatives there, and the relatives said, okay, let's let him go back to Kentucky. So they did bring him back to Kentucky in 1845. Actually, they brought him back the latter part of July, I believe it was. They brought him up by a river, up the Ohio River, down the Kentucky River, and they parked right back of the old post office building there. Then they brought him up to the old Capitol building, where he was lying in state there for a couple of months, because it was about the middle of September when he was buried here in the Frankfort Cemetery. And at the funeral, the hearse was drawn by 4 white horses up here to this spot, and he was buried here. And who do you think made the main speech, Barbara?
John J. Crittenden.
That's right.
Oh! I have been listening.
Yeah, you know, I'm a great admirer of John J. Crittenden. That's right. He made the main speech up here about Daniel and Rebecca Boone right here in the Frankfort Cemetery. Barbara, I want to let you know, this is the end of our tour. I want you to know, I want the people that have seen this show, I want them to know that you have been just great, and I have certainly enjoyed working with you, and I hope maybe sometime in the future we can get together again.
I would love that. You are this show, though. I just sit here and hold the microphone, and I've enjoyed working with you and listening to you, and this has given me such a chance to know Kentucky and to know a great man like you. Thank you.
You're a mighty nice girl. Thank you.
You.